So welcome everyone. Thank you for being here on this spring evening. And I know that there's a lot of competing events, and we're delighted that you're here with us for the second lecture of the Andrés Bello Chair, Marisa Belausteguigoitia. I'm going to do a very, very brief introduction so that Marisa can share with you her work, but say that we are extremely honored to have a scholar, a builder of institutions, an activist, and a protagonist in the shaping of human rights discourse and actions for women, particularly in Mexico. Marisa is an extremely active scholar with a doctorate from Berkeley, and a scholar who has founded at her university, the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México, a program in gender studies, and chaired it for a good long time. For too long, she says. She is an extraordinary scholar working across themes like gender and coloniality and the theorization of the subject before the state and the law. And her work has moved beyond the academic circles, which all of us know, and which are their own form of social practice and teaching, to intervening in prison work and the work of women in prison, and to becoming a filmmaker chronicling that intervention, which brings the university to a sort of reparative work, to a work of social justice, and brings the students to the prison, right? So it's a two-way flow of urgencies and priorities, and has really transformed, I think, both institutions that she works through. She's in the process become a filmmaker, a documentarist, documentalista, I don't know how to transliterate that exactly, and produced award-winning documentaries, one of which we screened, Mujeres en Espiral, we screened for her first public offering. We are very honored that she's here with us this semester. She will present, in addition to tonight's lecture and presentation, on April 16th, she has a conversation, a public conversation, and on April 25th and 26th, her symposium. So please look at kjcc.org and come back for those remarkable events that she has planned. It's my pleasure to present to you Marisa Belausteguigoitia, the Andrés Bello Chair for 2019.
Thank you very much for being here. I want to thank Ana Dopico, Laura Turegano, Luis Pérez, Ángel Antonio Ruiz, and Santiago Barcaza for making my life in El King Juan Carlos I Center immensely happy. This talk explores the inclination of the university towards the prison system, and I try to define what I call translucent pedagogies. These pedagogies try to underline critical maneuvers that can be produced through the contact of opposites. It's very important to contact not only what you have in mind and what you know, but what you don't know. So all of my presentation has to do with critical thinking as the unregulated and as the contact with that is foreign. And I want to stress that in what kind of institution does the university get transformed when it seeks something else, and something that is not previsible, and something that is unregulated, exactly the opposite of professionalization, or not exactly the opposite, but displaced from professionalization. During the month of February, in the midst of the polar vortex, temperatures of sub-zero, a frozen image appeared on TV. No electricity, no heating, nor warm water in Brooklyn Detention Center. A gray monumental wall filled the screen. From its opaque windows, we saw what appeared to be hands moving and waving. A few days after the broadcasting of these opaque windows and waving hands, a growing crowd of people, mainly women, gathered in front of this monumentally cold wall. They were shouting and protesting the lack of attention to the freezing urgency. We could read in their banners, "We love you, we care for you, you are important for us." Interviews depicted frustrated and extremely hesitant women crying, calling the city to respond. Women began to trespass the doors of the detention center to desperately inquire about their loved ones. During almost 2 weeks, the frozen image was broadcasted with no response of authorities but gas spray to disperse the crowd. After 10 days of repeated broadcasting of silent walls, screams, and sprays, the wall began to talk. Intermittent lightning through the windows of the detention center illuminated it. Electricity was reinstalled. It was as if suddenly the cold gray wall was ignited. The intermittence and brightness of that lightning transformed the great silent wall into a translucent one. The crowd outdoors exploded in applause. 1. Outdoor pedagogies, inclemency and exposure to understand something else. Ileana Diegues, a Mexican academic at UAM, Universidad Autónoma de México, has developed a notion, pensamiento a la intemperie, outdoor thinking, to reflect on the bridging of academia towards activism as an ongoing experiment. The Spanish word intemperie has an accent on inclemency and exposure, which outdoors lacks. Outdoors as intemperie is a notion related to exposition, to vulnerability, and the capacity to refer and relate to major social urgencies. Silvia Rivera Cusicanqui refers to it as practices which embody opportunities of new forms of doing and thinking. We call this literature theory. With them, we try to think, imagine, and activate possible ways to persist in this world. Resonating with Cusicanqui's activation of other ways of persisting through imagination, of new forms of doing and thinking, José Revueltas, an intellectual writer and activist of the 60s in Mexico, understands as acts of theory those instances of narration, those vivid acts of contact, connecting and producing a polyphony of voices which thrive for representation and activation of sub-zero events. These acts of theory constitute narrative which escape the disciplinary thinking of the already there and foster the something else. An act of theory emerges when the contact with what exceeds disciplinary thinking explores unexpected ways of being with others, unregulated economies of giving, taking, and being. If academic thinking is outdoors, a la intemperie, Grüner says, it is probably a good moment to move, to maneuver it, to tilt it, to incline it to the frozen and gray walls. Waving hands, polyphonic screams, and unexpected connections constitute constellations which relate to the production of the something else, the not already there, as an openness to find resonances that look for answers in such adverse climate conditions. Anne Carson expresses this task as the challenge of the translator as narrator. It is not that we want to understand everything. It is that we want to understand something else. To be outdoors is also to seek the something else. These sub-zero pedagogical notions are inspired in the collectives of family members, mainly women, activists, artists, journalists, academics, housewives, that are accompanying the search for disappearing bodies in Mexico and other countries of Latin America and the world, empezando por las Madres de la Plaza de Mayo. No? One of the literary and cultural figures that has appeared on the searching for disappeared bodies in Latin America since the 60s has been Antigone. And Carson's latest translation of Antigona, Antigonic, brings translucent windows, waving hands, open doors to the tragedy. In her translation, the door in Kafka's Before the Law, close to the peasant, is open to women and to literature, to movement and figuration, as with Derrida in the Pharmacon. Antigona's rereading by Latin American writers, Uribe, Gambaro, Watanabe, represent these outdoor pedagogies, maneuver and theoretical actions which create narration with diffraction, deviation, and dispersion to better understand the classic, or as Carson wonderfully states it, as to understand something else. As Barcenilla would put it, these are translucent readings of the original that interrupt the appearance of clarity of a narration, which allows for the visibility of the contours of the not seen and not said, the not accountable, the unregulated. Translucent mechanisms permit light to pass through, but not only but only by diffusing it, so that a person and objects on the opposite side are but not clearly visible. So it's partial visibility all the time, and that is important. Translucent mechanisms represent the possibility to communicate excessive, delicate, and dangerous events using the economy of intermittence, that is, the negotiation of the visible and the invisible, presence and absence, light and obscurity, silhouette and body, contours and substance, silence and screams, discipline and indiscipline, individual and collectives. In this talk, I will focus on the trespassing of light that allows for the visibility of the contours of person and objects on the opposite side to appear. I will underline the invisible path and traces, the erased footsteps and emerging footnotes left by prisoners and migrants by addressing maneuvers and strategies in the robbing at the limits of the penitentiary and the academic systems, its gray and white walls. This robbing produces the necessary inclination as a call to do something, but also as a slope towards critical language needed for the like to trespass the object. I'm using the friction of the university with an unexpected space, such as prison, as a kind of contact that tilts towards critical thinking, and critical thinking as something outside, something irregulated, unregulated, when both institutions can be connected and operate towards inclination to the something else. These, as maneuvers of intermittence, as translucent actions, what is already there, what is lacking, what is visible and invisible, that may manufacture the experience of instances of freedom inside prison and inside academia. The strategic opacity of translucent mechanism allows for the tenuous appearance of what is not already there, there's something else. These translucent gestures are needed to create lines of fugue, as in Deleuze, actions that may enter and exit the pre-existent structures of the university and prison, illuminating path for critical thinking. Several questions emerge. Which economies of intermittence, as the being together, being with others, and being with oneself, may the university ignite, as Harney and Moten advise in the Undercommons? How may trails weaved through encounters at the limits of disciplinary systems like academia and prison precipitate into actions that open to critical thinking as the something else, as responses in the place of the normative, the anticipated, and the foreseeable? What kind of trespassing and which type of crossing takes us beyond what constitutes ways of being and reproducing academia beyond the familiar? This is what this talk is about, the narration of an experience, an ongoing experiment as a line of fugue of the disciplinary structure of prison and university, a project which aims to transform students into fugitives as runaways, elusive outlaw thinkers, escaping a disciplinary and professionally mainly academia, and women in prison as creative intellectuals and critical thinkers escaping a closed institution, both switching as counterpointing and intermittent acts. 2. The project, Mujeres en Espiral, Spiral Woman, Juridical System, Gender Perspective, and Critical Pedagogies, Antigone before the law. In December of last year, Mujeres en Espiral, Spiral Woman, Juridical System, Gender Perspective, and Critical Pedagogies, a project I direct based at UNAM in the humanities, that's important, that works for the access to justice for women in prison, just finished a short film on Antigone, done with women in prison called Cihuatlán, Antígonas de Santa Marta. Santa Marta Catitla is a women-only prison located in Iztapalapa, southwest portion of the city, intensely populated and vibrant in crime and also in culture. The facility was created in the place where there used to be an immense garbage disposal. It was constructed and planned as a modern project. Today, it is slowly sinking like complete sections of Mexico City due to the softness of the terrain. Women in prison call it the ship and figure that they are slowly crossing waters of concrete in uneven and unknown melting terrains. During more than 10 years, Mujeres en Espiral, Spiral Women, a group of students, activists, artists, and lawyers, and academics, has been working with women in prison, creating with them a whole array of artistic and pedagogical and juridical products, documentaries, murals, illustrated books, poetry, dictionaries, fanzine, and also juridical revision of cases, amicus curiae, benefits, manual, reports. Every single product done yearly since 2008, functions as a trace and represent a contribution to the transformation of women in prison, the understanding of crime related to gender inequality, poverty, subjectivity, and the critique of the neutral structure of juridical and laws and procedures. Last year, we created a short film in the rereading of the tragedy of Antigone. We read Sophocles under one of the umbrellas, La Palapa, on the prison patio, which functioned as a wall-less classroom. That's prison. And that's the group, and that's the Palapa where we study. That's our classroom. The antecedent of the short film had to do with the overtaking of that which constrains in prison and also in academia, walls. 3, urgency and color. From 2003 to 2014, I was chair of the Gender Studies program at UNAM. The program attended many social urgencies emanating from different systems and institutions. Unions of garbage collectors, directed by women, the military, judges, police, grammar teachers, journalists, prisoners, high school students, social movements, femicides. In 2008, a very exceptional urgency emerged. Women in prison were demanding something very special. They wanted color. They claimed for it as an emergency. They urged for color. We quickly understood the provision of color to the monochromatic space of prison as a social urgency. Gray walls in prison were an additional burden to reclusion. If women could not get out, color could get in. The process of sensitizing authorities themselves convinced that punishment is colorless and monochromatic was interesting. One argument was key to convince them. The historical value of muralism in Mexico, its monumentality, its official investiture. We did not allude to the opposite value of muralism, that is, the possibility to represent hidden, radical, and critical discourse. This hidden script, as Scott names it, as gesture of translucency, negotiation of visibility and visibility, help us to convince authorities. Consider the following as an example of the strategy of the intermittent negotiation of the visible and the invisible, the said and the not said. During the painting of the second mural, we paint 4 in 5 years, I found it very strange that several women were animated painting, laying face down in an invisible space, the ceiling of the lowest tone of the spiral. This is without painting, and this is painting. And they were crawling, the women were crawling in that space and painting the ceiling of that space in the last turn. I knew what that invisible space made possible by chance. On one of our working Mondays, I saw what it appears to be an enclosing with metal bars and chicken wires of our second mural. This is the director, the one with the green skirt, is the director of the penitentiary. There are these women, and it's not very visible, but there is a chicken wire and there are the posts, and they wanted to close and to enclose in a prison and close the work of art, and you will see why. They wanted to close it. Men were digging holes and planting bars to surround the spiral stairs from bottom to top. I ran to see the director. She explained, enraged, the reason for such a seizing of a mural. The woman used this protected and hidden space to cuddle and to make love. That was unthinkable in the prison she surveils. And they painted in the ceiling, very nice. I was thinking, why did they paint in this place where you don't see? And it was the place to make love. I could both talk to the director into not imprison art in prison, and at the same time internally laugh and respect enormously the skillful talents of the women longing for a beautiful and hidden, both impossible in prison space to make love. This is another mural we make, and this is the Área de Castigo. This is the place where they punish women inside prison, where they actually imprison them double in prison, and this is the way they painted it. 4, talking to walls. Lacan, in talking to brick walls, represents the possibility of producing significant knowledge, teaching and interpreting only when transcending walls, the walls of phallic order or normative and disciplinary knowledge. Talking to brick walls can be read as resisting hegemonic systems such as prison and sections of academia. It can also mean representing knowledge more as a finding, as an unexpected wonder than something premeditated and predictable. Advancing the unforeseeable in prison and in academia means expanding reductive and restrictive discipline. It means also considering the prisoner as more than a number, a crime, a sentence, or a disenfranchised subject, and the student as more as somebody seeking only a profession. Prisoners and students in the open classroom, searching outdoors for the something else, profess in the Derridian way for freedom to think and escape disciplinary and seek for unregulated and outside-the-box thinking. Within our project, the borders of prison and academic discipline related to time and space got transformed. We're seeking here that one, what can escape academia and that what can escape the prison system. And we see that time and space can be reshaped when prison and academia rub. Women prisoners have to respond to 3 calls during the day. That interrupted everything they did. The calls were not only normative measures to assure they did not fugue, but strategies to remind them 3 times a day that they were imprisoned. Within our wall-less classroom in the prison patio, they could avoid 2 roll calls, having the perception of extended time, a luxury in prison. Space could be displaced also from the prison patio, the space of waiting and longing, to being in a classroom at the university, an extremely respected space for women in prison. Free time and open space translates in opportunities to read and move, to speculate about the text and through it on other horizons of meaning. Students at the university in the prison patio have to negotiate their own conception vis-a-vis the horizon of the text, reading Antigone in the wall-less classroom of a prison patio or reading it in the classroom of the university. They have to rethink the field, what theory means, their desires and the notion of freedom to learn not only what they need, but something else, strategically escape professionalization. This reordering of free time and space favored the speculation in the reading of Sophocles' Antigone in the prison patio and in the university classroom. For example, woman in the workshop in prison interrupted Antigone with what we think is a fundamental gesture. They transcended the covering with golden power of the body of her brother, Polynice, to the covering and the limiting of their own of the very same body as a critical act. And they painted the silhouettes as the presence of the absence. They were citing the Siluetazo in Plaza de Mayo. And students in the university offered a silhouette workshop to prisoners when they delineated their absent bodies. They gave women in prison their bodies back by delineating their contours. They did not get only in the other's shoes, but in the other's body. This is one of the exercises we did in prison, and this is the classroom, and the students were lying down and contouring their bodies and giving their bodies to the prisoners. Later, they offer them with their names and their experience. In Plotting Woman, Jim Franco uses Antigone's impossibility, to problematize the creation of national identity through what she calls masculine text, which create allegories where women remain the secondary subjects outside the national hegemonic narratives of heroism and rivalry. Romanticism and sexual desire were the only visible scripts where they can be integrated. In which ways, within which critical narrative maneuvers, could women in prison, criminals, and bad women enter the circuit of the nation concerns and nation's affective movements that could link them with the disappeared? Women in prison are forgotten. They are not the disappeared that are being sick. They are only forgotten. They are not there. In one word, how could women in prison appear by being recognized as disappeared? 5, reading as moving. Most women in prison did not finish high school and even middle school, and more than half of indigenous women are illiterate. To inscribe elocution and orality with some authority inside the classroom is difficult and mainly leading to frustration. When we began to read aloud with them in the prison patio inside the wall-less classroom, women stuttered, like me now, women stuttered and stumbled with section of the text. Hannah Arendt defines politics in a kinetic manner. In her unfinished introduction to politics, Arendt affirms that we have reached a point where we do not know, not yet, how to move politically. The expression move signals a direction of movement, one that is specially compromised in prison, freedom. Politics' aim represents the pointing of movement to freedom. The not yet defines wonderfully the opening of possibilities that it can be other way. It inscribes openly the something else related to freedom. When we lose the capacity to move politically, what we are losing is the possibility of moving freely and towards freedom. The reading subject in prison would be women moving towards a new representation of themselves, fugitive of juridical, familiar, and patriarchal notions. Lacan's reference to direction, to movement, and to freedom is also interesting to point out. We face the construction of the subject due to the encountering moving towards sexuality and desire. The comments of women in prison in relation to Antigone's desires and action were pointed as so obviously restricted to family. We experience a kind of reading Antigone as performative exercise, reading as walking, as an encounter with their unknown sexual desires and unexpected forms of freedom, an experience of the something else. The movement towards desire is they are experienced free. They were slowly discovering their attraction to other women, a new corporal sensation of desire inside prison. Antigone reading allowed them to move in the place of constraints through the acknowledgement of both desire towards other women and desire to be somebody and better somebody else, as opposed to the foreseeable woman they had been, trapped inside their family's demand and diminished sexual desires. The speculation around the text the reading opened their bodies to exploration. This is how one of the women in prison opened to desire at the borders of the text, were longing to escape bad memories of previous sexual encounters. This movement towards sexuality, desire, and freedom allowed for the revision of the juridical sentences imposed as a reinvention of the script and also as a revision of the juridical grammar in their status of criminal before the law with languages beyond the expected for a poor and ignorant woman. It was very interesting how sexuality and pleasure ignite also a kind of juridical grammar that allows them to speak before the law in a different way. So sexual desire was very much tied to juridical grammar. Within the frame of our project, young lawyers, human rights fighters, pedagogues, all fugitives from the idea of the law as neutral and contextless, worked with them to mutually understand their involvement with the crime as women and from a gender perspective. Within these conceptual frames, even Antigone's act of offering her life for her brother's burial was being desacralized and questioned. Karen, one of the bad mother, that's the name of the case, currently being processed at the Supreme Court through the mediation of our clinic of public interest, was found guilty and sentenced for not doing anything when her boyfriend attacked her daughter, killing her while she was absent. There is a crime for which apparently only women are sentenced for not doing anything. It is called homicide in parental relation commission by omission. Rarely are men accused of commission by omission. Regularly, their crimes are commissioned by direct action. 6. Footnoting and footprinting, stumbling pedagogies. We explain in the wordless prison classroom that whenever academics want to represent or make visible or inscribe something else that occurs outside the text or at its borders, a level of speculation, we use the figure of a footnote. They understood their personal experience, the speculative moves vis-a-vis the text, as a process of descent and descent, from the stuttering tongues to the stumbling feet, from the original text to the twisted script. Reading represented a way of walking and descending, a way of decanting. The restriction in prison echoed the restriction of the text when read with constrained disciplinary normative. When liberated inside the wall-less time and space of prison and academic normativity, they could walk the text more freely. When they reached an experience that could be integrated into the script, a footprint, a footnote, they represented it as if stumbling within the text, as if the event became a stone, a limit, an obstacle for the fluent reading, tripping with their own experience, stumbling with their lives, interrupting the reading with their bodies, experiences, and desires. Stumbling and stuttering, detaining and redirecting the reading can be understood as acting theory. This time, women could not leave their lives aside. We call that the pedagogías del tropiezo, stumbling pedagogies. Women incorporated their context in the reading and creation of their Antigone in order to inscribe trails and traces that could make them and their journey visible. Women opened the text for this kind of contextual visibility. Women opened the text for this kind of contextual visibility. Something of its capacity for speaking their truth was also at stake. Something of their capacity of doing theory appeared. We do not expect to find Hegel here. Women in prison invented their own Antigone. They brought her into life, stumbling and stuttering. According to Zizek, the only way to keep a classical work alive is to treat it as an open text pointing towards the future, or to use the metaphor evoked by Benjamin, to act as if the classic work is a film for which the appropriated chemical to develop it was invented only later, so that it's only today that we can get the full picture. From this wall-less classroom and its authors and stumbling pedagogies exposed to the panopticon, to police and custodians, to other women passing by, women reading Antigone were not waiting patiently before the law. Unlike Kafka's peasant, they were screaming and moving, deviating, eluding vigilance, erring, going all over the place at the borders of the text and before the law, improvising movements as fleeting comments and errant reading, fugitive within the constraints and vigilant space of prison. During the reading, they question actions that have all to do with care and with the covering of the bodies of their family members. They narrated the ways in which they entered the crime scenes not only as secondary agents, but also as the most vulnerable ones, and many times invited by their husband, uncles, fathers, sons to cover them. We were slaves outside. The stumbling and stuttering footnotes at the bottom of their script page showed not only alternative ways to read Antigone, but alternative scripts to be woman and move freely. Women in prison continued stumbling and deviant from the literally of the tragedy to the point of expressing that they want to use the rope where Antigona hanged herself to help citizens to escape from the debris of last earthquake. In Mexico, we had, and at that time, a very, very bad earthquake. To escape prison themselves, or to tie and bring the violent ones into jail. One of them even wanted to transform the rope into the Wonder Woman one. They wanted Antigone to speak in Nahuatl, to be Indian. They expressed their desire to be part of the body searched by so many Mexicans, to be Polynese. They wanted to appear in the national scene, to be seen and to be present. Even an earthquake that shocked Mexico City was a theme they discussed to include in the movie. And they did. They constructed and enacted a scene where they appeared giving keynotes, talks and advices to the Chilangos, how to survive when you have lost everything, how to continue when everything falls upon your head. They created a collective called Antígonas de Cihuatlán. According to one, our indigenous Cihuatlán means cueva. They did not want to die inside the cave. The actual punctum of the short film ended up being a manual for survival. Instead of doing an Antigone, they do a manual for survival offered by the Antígonas de Cihuatlán to the Mexican Chilangos.
Por un accidente dejé de firmar y me volvieron a encerrar. Y dicen que tengo que compurgar. Esto es terminar los 6 años, 8 meses de mi condena. No es justo. ¿Por qué el juez no piensa en las circunstancias de mi accidente? Por último, tengo que decir que las mujeres tenemos derechos, que debemos y podemos expresarnos.
¿Para qué nos quieren aquí encerradas si somos más productivas afuera?
Pónganos a trabajar para el bien de este México, para que nosotros podamos ayudar a salvar gente, a desenterrar a niños y jóvenes que también nos necesitan.
Estas son las maniobras para sobrevivir. Lo primero que hice fue tomar la mano de quien fuera, sin orgullo, sin prejuicios, sin pensar. Solo tomas de lo que tienes a la mano, una pala, una piedra, lo que sea. Si tienes que vender cosas o incluso venderte a ti para sobrevivir y poder vivir, hazlo sin prejuicios, eso solo estorba. Abre tu mente y reacciona. La unión hace la fuerza. Todavía estamos a tiempo para levantarnos y cambiar el futuro, pero hay que empezar desde ahora reaccionando.
6. The slippers, traces in detention. During the script and camera workshop to create the short film of Antigona, a special type of stumbling, footnotes, and speculation maneuvers emerged related with the bodies that Antigone in prison wanted to discover. In one of our conversations of crossing borders, a special border emerged, the one that is located in the US-Mexican border. Some of them many of the women had relatives that had crossed the US-Mexican border, and some of them without reaching the other side, others being lost in the desert, drowned in the river, or hurt in accidents. Only few were living in the US. They were aware, the women in prison were aware of the possibility of migrants and their family members to be holding detention. This prison experience brought them closer. The frequency and relative easiness of the events of imprisonment, disappearance, and death of the relatives of the women in prison contrasted with the epic, exceptional, and royal narrative of Eteocles and Polynices' death, Antigone's brothers. Women in prison wanted not only a burial, the ritual with golden power, but that the bravery and the adventurous nature of their loved ones was recognized. The invitation of guests to enter prison reinforces the idea to resemble it more as a cultural center, a place for fugitive thoughts, art presentation, collective formation, speculation, than a detention facility where bodies dwell and hurt. For this specific semester and for the work of Antigone, we invited a UCLA academic, Maite Subiarre, who worked with disappeared migrants through the trails left by their belongings in their resting spot and the places where they sleep. The objects left as residuals and as traces on the trail were mostly thrown away and taken as garbage by authorities. You may know Jason de Leon, the Land of Open Graves. He accounts there for some of these phenomenologies of suffering. Each of the disappeared bodies was shaped by a wake of objects from which they were forcibly dispossessed. In her presentation to the woman in prison, Maite was also inquiring about a precise object used by migrants, a pair of slippers, a special kind which Mexican migrants use as part of the migrant kit. The kit contains a light, a blanket, water, power food, and a pair of slippers, wide open, large slippers that are tied over the shoes. The slippers, she explained, are the central part of the kit, even more important than food or water. They have the function of hiding the migrants' traces in the desert. The border is highly surveilled, and footprints are trails that are easy to follow. The idea of crossing, of moving and walking without leaving a trace, caused great distress to the women in our group. We had understood reading as walking, footnoting their way to freedom as a tilting encounter with experience, with desire, and with the text content, and as an opportunity of leaving traces of their own experiences about the text, their lives, their new time and free space. We do not want to walk without leaving traces, Gabi strongly commented. We have been silenced for too long. They wanted to intervene in the invisible journey of the migrants, footnoting their text, adding their presence to that specific experience. The collective inside prison heard astonished Gabi's answer. We want to leave traces, marking their willingness to be present and visible. The invisible ones, the women that have been enclosed, silenced, and forgotten, manifest their willingness to leave traces, be seen, and be part of another experience of crossing. Next Monday, using their desire to appear, leaving footprints behind, we offered them a workshop in footnoting and footprinting. In order to make visible their erased traces of prisoners and migrants, we figured an activity as part of our workshop. Students, activists, professionals, prisoners, filmmakers would walk through the prison patio, leaving traces as in a footbridge. We facilitated a long cloth that resembled a skywalk that crossed the prison patio. We painted the prisoner and students' soils with different colors so traces could be printed clearly when they walk. The delicacy and the determination of the footprints acted as the visible representation of the willingness to walk, to read, to imprint their unregulated experience and their presence. Let me give you an account of another activity that underlines the strong desire of appearing through appearing with others in unexpected and free encounters. After walking with painted soils of the feet in the footbridge, late crossing the prison space, women prisoners decided that they wanted the footprints, the traces, soot incorporated to their daily activities. They figured out they would cut them from the cloth and sew them to their purses, which they never abandoned. A surprising act followed. Women prisoners and students began to interchange souls and footprints. I give you my trace and you give me yours. What is it that you give when you offer your trace? This interchange of footprints meant, of course, the one of journeys, memories, but especially of understanding that to be self is also to be other. The enactment of interchanging traces between asymmetrical subjects, activists, graduate students, fugitives, students, prisoners, manifested a dialectic of encounters, horizontal and collective constellation of others that not only modify time and space as time of urgency and contact, but brings us closer to understanding theoretical acts as outdoor strategies. Maneuvers that may displace gestures from the sole of the feet to the hands of those who wave behind the gray walls. 7. Students stumbling pedagogies. Parallel to the making visible of trails, traces, and footsteps in prison, I was teaching a class, graduate and undergraduate, on disapparition. I was opening with Antigone. We read different ones, Uribe, Gambaro, Watanabe, Zambrano, Brecht. The idea was to situate students in resonance with the necessary dispersion and deviation maneuvers from the original as a way to find path, footnotes, and traces as maneuvers of freedom and acts of theory. Interruption of the original text under outdoor pedagogies to walk it freely and to preview the something else as a theoretical act situated students more in the contact with borders of academia and its outsiders and outsides. They are more exposed, students are more exposed and closer to the university limits when they practice these pedagogies. On September 3rd, 2018, just beside the humanities, where we were holding classes, a building, a tragedy occurred. A student of Azcapotzalco High School, UNAM incorporates high schools, a student was stabbed just in front of Rectoria, the Chancellor's building at the main campus. 14 students were injured. A group of students of CCH Azcapotzalco, northeastern part of the city and extremely disenfranchised neighborhoods, were protesting the lack of attention to the multiple administrative and curricular failures of the authorities. The long dismissals of these demands triggered to action and protesting through a very significant act, related again with walls. Graffiti and muralism is a common practice between students inside the academic facilities. Muralism functions with its radical and resistant face. Students wanted to represent their anger and dissatisfaction with disappearance, the 43, femicide, and the complete disregard of their demands by creating different murals in the walls bordering their school. Zapata, Lucio Cabañas, Subcomandante Marcos, Revueltas were placed in murals that resembled much of the 17th aesthetic, very masculine catalog of heroes. You couldn't find a woman there. The complete erasure of their murals, ordered by the high school director, triggered the protest of more than 300 students in front of the Chancellor's building. Let's not forget, we were and are in the 50th celebration of 68 protest and critique of educational system. Around 3 o'clock that Monday, another group dressed as students, but with sticks and knives, attacked the protesting students. A couple of days after the incident, a huge demonstration was orchestrated by students and academics. Students produced, parallel to the reading of Antigone, also stumbling footnotes as the ways in which the something else of experience appeared beside the text. The humanities struggled for several days, several weeks. We deviated from the official classroom and created an ambulant and wall-less one. My class met in the outdoors of another patio, this time of the University Museum, with a workshop on performance. The whole class participated in different demonstrations. They created an incipient collective called Antígonas Filosas. Filo means sharp in Spanish, and filo is also the first 4 letters of the word filosofía. Shortly after the stabbing, a newspaper photograph showed Noemi, a student of Latin American studies, covering with her body the body of her attacked boyfriend, Joel, also a student in the violent events of September the 3rd. The picture showed them both in the ground, Joel wounded and bleeding, and Noemi covering him, protecting him from blows and further stabbing. The image persisted a long time in the academic community. So much so that students of several schools, including ours, went to the space of the erased murals and represented that scene in that very same wall. This was the first time that a woman entered as protagonist of the high school student murals, and her role was of covering. In our Monday's work in prison, we maintain students informed about the improving details of the screenplay in prison, and we maintain prisoners informed about the events in our classes at the university. Intermittent pedagogies make way inside and outside prison and university. Stumbling footnotes appeared in both classroom spaces, fugitive students and intellectual prisoners, murals, erasures, alternative readings of movements that convey a fugue from prison and academia. Let me finish with a last theoretical act performed by my students at the university as a manner of visibilizing the different gestures that the something else allowed. The last day of class, December 5th, my students occupied their classroom walls and decided to paint murals inside it as a form of protest. They painted cracks in the wall, women turning their backs on what encloses, and intervened the classroom windows. The strong call for critical thinking, done through outdoor and stumbling pedagogies and translucent maneuvers, made prisoners appear as students and free subjects, and students as committed to social urgings and fugitives of bonded spaces and neutral time. Both transformation, freedom in prison, and urgency in academia are especially meaningful in territories where violence is causing young students and women to disappear. The struggle on visibility, the act of light trespassing the thick walls of prison and university, understood as theory, is unending. This spring 2019, when class resumed, we witnessed that the beautiful and delicate murals inside our classroom were erased, but not completely. Their translucency could be perceived through the thick white painting. There is a sticking tongue there. My favorite image still remains illuminated, the traces of student hands in the frames of the classroom window, the imprints of a fugitive entering and exiting the windows of the great and white walls. Thank you. I'm the queen of stumbling pedagogies, by the way. Do you have any question or comments?
Thank you so much. And one will understand here that you can jail a person, but you cannot jail their imagination. And you can see that there is a lot of talent. I wonder if these people had art exposure in their life, that they express themselves so beautifully.
Yeah. Well, the prisoners are really more or less, or more than less disenfranchised. They are come from lower classes, in let's say 80–90%. But what is very interesting here is more the friction when students and lawyers and activists go to prison, like in a trope, in a group. What, for example, in NYU, they do these kind of things, but it's one professor that goes to a it's very structured. What is very interesting for me and what I'm trying to research and to understand is what unregulation does, what freedom does. What is freedom in jail and what is freedom in academia? So when you escape disciplinary thinking, it's not only that you escape history or that you escape pedagogy, it's that you really try to find something else. You really try to find what to be in the university, more than seeking for skills of a professional knowledge, to look for, let's say, critical tools. And what is critical tool? What is being critical? And we found that critical is being uh, what erupts in the contact with the foreign, with the other, with the unexpected, with the unruled. And what appears there is really something fascinating that also serves for the students to make their dissertations or to have an idea to enter a master that is really outside the box. And so they, of course, they go to university and make masters and PhD, but they are always bordering the limits of the university and trying to think with other tools and trying to incorporate this stumbling pedagogy is trying to incorporate what makes a limit with the things they find familiar, or that desestabilize the thing that find familiar. So prison is a place where everything is also very, very regulated and very disciplined. And the entering of a group of people, not only one to teach in a classroom, no, but of a group, it causes some kind of disorganization in time and space that helps, for also for desire to emerge. The whole accounts we have had of sexual desire, the whole awakening of sexuality and desire, very close to juridical procedures, is also a thing I really want to study. Sexual desire and juridical grammar, for example.
Could you expand on what you mean by juridical grammar for those of us that didn't see the first film? What you mean about the connection between juridical
It's
grammar?
exactly the sentence they have in if they are there for robbing or for drug dealing or for homicide, and they have an idea of what they did, and they are also many times very guilty because they are the women that take care of their places and they are in prison and are very guilty. But when they begin to see like the pattern, right, like the system, capitalism, patriarchy, heterosexuality, because we talk with them. I mean, the students, all the time we're doing workshops, and they understand like the script, the script on patriarchy, the script on capitalism. So they begin to see and to talk and to feel otherwise. So there is something else. We are not planning exactly what they will say or what they will do. We're just getting inside and doing many of the things they want. For example, if they want to research the laws or the normativity of the visit, for example. Sometimes the visit is very bad treated in the entrance, so they want to see their rights for the visit. Or they want to see, for example, what they call visita matrimonial, when they are visited by the husband, or male, for example, can be visited by friends and by novias and by everybody, and the women need to be married to get a visit. So they do, with the students, the very important thing is that the students get also a lot of unruled thinking and a lot of desestabilization in their thinking and in their questions when they are outdoors, when they are in contact with the women in prison, when they need to, for example, talk to their teachers to be allowed to not attend class and to give other type of exercises because they are going constantly to prison and are doing constantly work there. So they have to rearrange not only time and space of the courses they take, but of the questions they ask and of the truths they find. For example, what is Antigone in a prison patio and what is Antigone in a classroom, no? And they see it. They see the women, stumbling and stuttering, reading aloud Antigone and figuring out all these different relations of their experience, no, and opening, no. How can with Antigone you can end up creating a manual for survival? Antigone got killed no, she committed suicide in a cave. How do you come from committing suicide to actually creating a manual for survival, no? With a rope, no? As a kit, no? They created also a kit, no? Sorry, questions. See what?
How easy was it to gain the trust of the women in the prison? I also work in prisons, but in a completely different. I'm not an academic. I'm a human rights activist. So how easy was it to get their trust? Was it straightforward, or did you have to work on it, or how does it work?
It's we, we are we are there for many years, almost 12, and we are known for not abandon them, right? But what happens with in prison is that they go there and then they are there for 1 or 2 years and then they go away. And we took over the whole walls of prison, and the first act was the act of an uprising and taking all the walls of the public space in prison, we took them. So they know Mujeres en Espiral are the ones that have that created this space where the family comes and they say, oh, you are here, what is this? No, this is full of color, and it's really more as a cultural center than, so that's the first. And then we work with pedagogues, with psychologists. We have a lot of students and academics that come to prison and do workshops, and we have. It's really not. It's not a difficult thing to work with them, because we work with things they want. We ask them, what do you want to explore now? They wanted to explore labor, for example. We don't get paid. And they wanted to see also that they were working women, that they were not ill and stupid. So they wanted to do a book on the labor and on the work that was invented in prison. For example, la canastera, the one that gets food to the ones that are in prison, and the halconera, the one that advises when police comes, if they are having drugs, they have a lot of drugs there. So they are specific. They wanted to say, look, this is a society, and we have a lot of things going on. And they made a fanzine out of the whole different jobs they created, and they were very proud of them. And they made also another thing that was really fantastic, like pornographic, but it's not like, how do you say, like mild pornography, or soft, but like inviting women. They do a lot of manuals, inviting women to touch themselves. And they did a little fanzine on touching. And they wanted to do that. They wanted to be somebody that helped the society and that give their knowledge to the society. And that's a thing that we actually went there with the students, and the students began to do their dissertations, and they read part of the dissertation, and there is a lot of exchange. So they are really like discovering one thing that probably they knew, but not exactly, that they know things, that they are intellectuals, that they are important. So every year we create a product, a fanzine, a short film, and they have products. We have decenas de products, dozens of products. And these products are materials that show, that give evidence of their talent, of their intellect, of their capacity to ask questions, of their capacity to produce things with others, to ask and tell with students. So their sense of themselves and of the students, I guess what is fascinating for me is that these institutions that should separate, no? If they can have contact, they have a very hygienic contact. This is a messy contact. It's a contact in groups, and it's not regulated. And it's very regulated because, of course, we have a lot of care, and we are very institutional, and we ask for the bureaucracy, which is unending and really, really devastating, the bureaucracy. All the photos you have here are guerrilla photos that we are allowed only to shoot in 30 degrees. If you shoot this, you have the police there. But the students also have seduced in a very good way the police. So the students have a lot of friends in between the police. They invite them to paint. They invite them to be in our sexual workshops and our work workshops. In the workshops we do around the tensions that erupt in between families and gender violence. So the police is also part of this. And of course, in academia, we invite also different professors and academics and activists to be part of the, if we are doing labor, or if we are doing the visit, or if we are doing food, or if we are doing health, they select what they select what they have the feeling, and I think that's true mostly, that they direct the scene. Of course, we enter many times. For example, sometimes we have money, they give us money, and they say, we want this. And so how do you deal with that, no? And we go with the women and say, we have this money, but we need to do this. And sometimes they refuse. Sometimes they say, we don't want to do this. And then we say, please, please do it, because we need the money, and they do it. It's not all sometimes it's things like that. They understand also that, no?
From the educational point of view, I believe that they have classes. Most of the prisoners are illiterate, as you mentioned in the beginning.
The indigenous, half of the indigenous prisoners.
Yeah, but not what I'm saying. They're illiterate. They cannot read or write. Are these to the prisoner, the prisons, the system? Do they educate these people? They have to somehow give them classes, like from elementary over whatever the courses are going on. That's on the.
It's very weak. It's not very. The prisons themselves, the prisoners themselves, organize and give themselves the classes.
But it's not mandatory, let's say, in the system?
It is mandatory, but they don't, if they take classes, for example, they get the sentence reduced, right? Good behavior and taking classes helps a lot to the reduction of the sentence. But they don't hire professors or teachers. They are the same prisoners. A prison that was a teacher, or that is willing to be a teacher and to
So,
teach.
in other words, there are no teachers, there are no courses,
No.
there are no.
Nothing.
What about on the training for labor, trades?
More, see, but not much. Not much.
Because
There are a lot of different activities, but taught and given by the same prisoners, by the women in prison. They have a lot of different activities, but organized by them.
But unfortunately, it seems to me that whenever whomever get out of prison, they are better than they went in.
No.
They are just about the same kind of education, the same kind of
That's true.
moral mentality.
Well, you're
It's not
talking
really
about
improving them
Yeah.
to behave according to what we are saying, to behave in a better way. It's a little more concentration in the what are the feelings they have, and they are translated into the paintings, the murals that they did. But I don't see that like a real order mechanism, to start with education, to teach them to write and read and whatever, they can advance into that, in that way. So when they go out, they have a different mentality, which is a little more positive, I would think, than.
I think that the women in jail, the whole population of women in jail are not dangerous, and the crimes they commit doesn't make them this person that society doesn't want. It's a very, I think, wrong mechanism of jailing this type of women. They are mostly small robbering, and a third of them are innocents. And it would be good that prison would teach them, and that prison, but the whole project of prison and the way it is wrong. Not only because what you say, but because these women, they know how to live, they know how to be productive, they know how to be, and they either committed a mistake or were part of a family that dragged them into the crime scene. So they don't need to be corrected. They don't need to be taught. They probably needed to be taught some carpinteria or something, but they are not bad. They are not immoral, or they just are live in section of the society and neighborhoods that are rough and that are difficult. And I think prison is not at all the strategy to follow to make these women better, you know, at all. I don't think so.
Also, correctional facilities to correct them and train them and to educate them to come out.
Yeah, but they need to be corrected in the way they are women, right? In their patriarchal way. They need to be corrected in the way that they are the servants and the subalterns of their families. They need to be corrected in the way femininity and womanhood is. They never feel anything. They are all for their families. That's why Antigone is at the center. Antigone gave her life for her brother, and what I think what these women have to learn is not to read and write. They have to learn how to look for themselves. That's why in this stumbling with their experience, this stumbling pedagogies, what we find is that they found their own lives, their own bodies, their own sensations, and they incorporate it in the text, and they create fascinating short films, and they create documentaries, and they create fanzines, and they create projects just by reading a text and being heard and created in a wall-less classroom and being asked and being attended. They very easily create theory. That means they understand that their lives and their experience can be footnoted in a text and can create a constellation with the text and can produce knowledge as intellectuals. And this can be done in 1 month, and this can be done with illiterate women.
Can I speak?
Basically, they are on their own. In other words, they choose whatever they want to do. And there is no any regulation, any rule of educating them. For me, the most important thing is education.
Yes,
Thank you.
you're right on
Thank you for
that.
saying that.
They are not alone. But it's not a program, but the women teach themselves, and it could be done better. But they have the whole day. They have 8 or 9 hours of activities, different activities, but taught by the same. It's an interesting autogestivo. It's interesting also. See, yeah.
Hi. Good evening, everybody. My name is Solomon. I'm an organizer for an organization called Vocal New York that works specifically on ending mass incarceration. I want to first just thank you so much for ripping open the shackles of mental incarceration, which is something that we often overlook, and releasing color and life into people to humanize them, because I feel like often when we talk about incarceration and we use words like inmate and prisoner, we create a stigma around people who are in prison, who you say often are wrongfully incarcerated or incarcerated for the kind of crimes that don't even merit correction, like you were stating. And we were actually also involved in that first shot Brooklyn around the power
In
outage.
February, no?
Yeah, so that's the kind of work we do, and I really want to know from you how you could maybe create an adaptable model in some place like a New York City jail, like Rikers Island, or uh, the Tombs, Manhattan Detention Center. Have you thought about that? And yeah, how could we work together to make that happen?
The system of prison in the US is so scary and so closed and so bounded and so normative. There is no escape in that prison system. The Mexican prisons are much more, or the women prisons, which I know, I really want to work with in the male institutions. That will be in the future. But what I see in the female prisons is there is space for unregulated activities, you know, and that is very important. I don't see a way. I've been trying, since I came here in January. I've been trying to hook up with the people in prison and to go to a prison, and it's impossible. Of course, it's possible, but it's a lot of bureaucracy, and this is the plan. One teacher goes to one bounded classroom and teaches there, and that, I find that extraordinary. I'm not criticizing that. They teach literature, and they teach engineering, and they teach a lot of different disciplines that are really I think that's okay. But what I'm trying to do here is that students go to the university as a public space, not only to be professionals, but to be intellectuals, to think outside the box, to think on this something else that is not there. The things that you will find as answers are always in the rubbing with the opposites, in the rubbing with the strangers, in the rubbing with whom you do not know. This experience of collectivities and of bringing together different disciplines and activists and artists and lawyers that get together and get to a very difficult place like prison and they are exposed to these stigmatized others is la bomba. It's like a formula for really powerful products and powerful thinking. And this thing of critical thinking, what is critical thinking? And I said, critical thinking is really this unregulated thinking that is done by systems that normally don't work together and with people that regularly work in their own disciplines. So let's displace these disciplines, let's look for projects that can create collectives that can move, as Hannah Arendt said, that can move and get in contact with other collectives. And this kind of work cannot be done as if now in the prisons of America, and I find it really, really sad. I wish I had what they have here. I wish that we had 1-on-1 and that they were teaching engineering and physics and literature to prisoners in Mexico. I wish we had what they have here, but I wish they had here what we have there, which is this kind of unregulated, disorganized, indisciplinary, fugitive contact of institutions. Institutions are regulated, right? But if you try to find these avenues where what you find is free space and free time, and finding that in jail, free space and free time is really extraordinary, or creating that. And my experience in this year is that you can create like chunks and experiences where freedom cannot be better understood than in jail. The women in prison are the ones that know best about what freedom means. And if you know how to ask, and if you know how to be with them, and if you know how the students get incorporated and have the experience of quotidian contact with women in prison, what you have is incredible products. The dissertations that we have had as an effect of this contact in PhDs, in master, and in undergrad are really very sensitive, well written. It's a pedagogical privilege to be in contact with these spaces that are, of course, stigmatized, and nobody would say you can find there the chemistry or the paradigms to critical thinking, no? It's like understanding that critical thinking is this something else, right? Is it not yet? Is this thing that comes when you get together and work as a collective that is very diverse and very, very different. Yes?
Yeah, thank you, Marisa, for that amazing. Thank you, Marisa, for that amazing talk. And I was just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on that stumbling pedagogies, which I find so suggestive and so beautiful, so poetic. And on the one hand, I'm thinking about how do you foster that? And on the other hand, I'm thinking of the people who stumble. Uh, you know, when do they recognize that stumbling is good? And you know, instead of just
Exactly.
simply trying to correct themselves, you know,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
when do they realize that that is an actual critical and critically valuable moment, that that's in its that's a goal, kind of.
Yeah. What we do with the prisoners, in much of our work, is to read out loud. And the script of Antigone is a very straightforward script, right? So they read it very slowly. And for example, when they are with Ismene, when they are talking with Ismene, they perfectly understand what is going on, no? They perfectly understand that Ismene doesn't want to, and they have all these things also in prison, no? We need to be silent, and there is also translucency, no? Antigona wants to come out and to jail, and Ismene is frightened, and she wants to be still. When things get problematic, is when she gets punished with this strictness, no? And of course the state is right because she committed a fault, and the excessive punishment for them is and their gender studies and all these questions about covering and giving the life for others then erupt, no? And we say, who did you cover to come here? We use the verbs, no? And the covering of the body is also the covering because the husband tell her, can you take this package from here to here, or can you clean and feed this man who was a kidnapped man? And they gave them the most vulnerable. They can find them in fraganti. All the things that women and young men do are in fraganti actions. So if they caught, they are done because they are found in the crime scene. So the issue of covering and discovering, they stumbled with their own experience. So the crime scenes, they were very guilty because they committed a crime, but then the crime scene gets renewed. And they think, well, I think I am the one that needs to be covered for once, no? When we told them about Joel y Noemi, they were saying, oh my God. They were saying, there is no woman in the murals. They did their own. And then they said, now they have one, and she's covering. They were saying, oh my God, there's not a way that women can enter the murals of the 70s and of these machirulos marxistas. Is there any way that women enter that is not covering? So the stumbling, the stuttering is when they find their own, they begin to give, it's translucency because it's the contours of their experience. It's not even their experience fully clarified. They begin to see the shadow of their experience in capitalism and these big words. We don't talk about capitalism or patriarchy or heterosexuality, but we talk about, the tensions of that systems and the way they affect their lives. And they end up doing capitalism, and they are anti-capitalist, and they want to do trueque, and they end up understanding what is heterosexuality, and they have very open relation with women. They even want to make fanzines about maneuvers, sexual maneuvers, and to help women that didn't have an orgasm to have many. They made a little book. So they still are women, right? Because what they do is all the time want to help. Well, now we know things. Now we have to do products that go outside jail, outside prison, and infect the Mexican population. So students are there and are also very accurate in doing fanzines, very accurate with techniques, and very accurate with the internet. And so they also get very inspired by these forms of freedom and these forms of intellectual capacity they see there. And they are part of this triggering. And I'm sure, for example, my students got very involved with and I was really suffering at that time. I was scared, because they got very involved, and I saw it. They went to paint the murals. They say, we paint murals in prison now. They went to paint the murals in Azcapotzalco. And they wanted to paint the murals. And I said, God, this is passion, no? The thing I wanted to talk about is passion. And I didn't know how to do it, no? And I did a very complex thing, but how do you talk about passion? How do you talk about this force that is outside the box? Passion is more than professionalization. Passion is more than getting the degree or getting the knowledge or getting. If you have passion, what you do is exceed the professionalization or exceed what is in the institution, no? And women in jail get also passionate. And so this is this encounter of passion that is extremely beautiful and extremely exciting. And this is what I want to do my whole life and try to understand, because I see many things that happen there with a lot of beauty and with a lot of emotion, and how do you give account of these things that happen? No, this for example, no, it begins with a gray wall and it ends with a translucent wall in the classroom. How do you make this circuit, no, of a translucent, the gray wall in Brooklyn, and then there is this wall in Mexico City that gets painted and is translucent also, no? It doesn't get completely erased. How do you from academia, how do you give account of that? No? You have to create these theories, and you have to move around understanding these emotions. And for me, the trigger was passion, but I couldn't say the word inside. I said, no, I won't say passion. I will try to deploy it in a different way, with some sort of movements and the word freedom and stumbling, and translucency was like the light that goes through these walls and depicts a contour of something possible that can be an answer, but it's done by many different stigmatized subjects. But many of my students are very poor, not all, and very bright. They could be prisoners like this. Not all of them. There are more fresas, no? There are also upper middle class students that are completely changed when they have this experience. So, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.